Howdys and salutations, y'all. Oop, are y'all not getting the Spotify audio? Oh no. Hmm. Okay, let's see if we can't get that fixed real quick. There we go. Now we got some music. Sorry about that. Hope y'all weren't waiting in silence there. I mean, it's not like it's any different songs from the usual bunch, but still. Apologies for that. Let's see. Alright, Twitch was notifying me something about chat highlights. Totally distracted me. Didn't mean that. Anyway, howdies and salutations once again. We will put all of those distractions on the back burner for the time being. Hope y'all are doing well today. I've just updated the stream title. I realized that I had like the same title for 6 streams and it didn't actually say what we were doing. That's my bad. I'll admit, these Miquella streams, I've definitely been more out of sorts in March than I was in February. Holy cow, I've been off the ball for some stuff. Speaking of which, I know that last time we said that we were done with composition, and we're mostly done with composition, but as I was going to do thumbnails, I tried to do, like I did last time with the Malenia ones, although admittedly I've started this a little early on this phase. I probably should have just done the sketch art, which I think I did anyway. But I was trying to color it in with just a grayscale, like a very loose, sketchy one, and I realized that this composition doesn't read very well. As much as it looks cool, I mean, that was the best one, and it's still way too busy. This one, similar problems. I went through a couple of iterations. Let's see. This one, in which I also realized that I was zoomed in too far and hadn't discovered exactly the size of the canvas either, so I'd missed some space above and below. There was this one, trying to get a line of action of any sort. There was this one, which is obviously thinking well off the mark. Not entirely sure how that happened. In any case, I was moving stuff around and I realized I was making it worse and worse, and so I just went to sleep and left it alone. But I did some pencil and paper sketches because it never hurts to go back to the basics, and I think I've got something that is very similar to this, won't require a lot of redrawing, especially not because we're still in this stage where we're figuring this out, so we don't have to do redrawing, hopefully. And I think that we can get this put together pretty quickly. Now, obviously, there's this challenging point in every, I say one point, it happens all the stinking time across every project, but where you've got to find that balance between, am I correcting stuff that needs to be fixed, or am I just nitpicking the heck out of this? And that's honestly where I was kind of leaving off yesterday. I was like, it looks decent, and like I don't want to nitpick it. But when I started doing the like actual like grayscales, I was like, oh, this actually doesn't look quite like I want. And also, lore-wise, one thing was bugging me too. Namely, that the eclipse didn't actually happen. Canonically, it didn't work. So, in order to prevent the confusing, let's walk through exactly what was off about the composition real quick before I go through some of the corrections I've devised, and which I think we can work on. Now, this is iteration like 12 or some nonsense, so, it's gone through a bunch of stuff. But there's a couple of issues. One, in terms of pure placement of things, that's not great. Like, yeah, there's kind of a line, but it's very static. There's not a clear action going on here. And it looks like Miquella is somewhat removed. I did try making the background less flat by angling the angle of the wall. You can see down here. That didn't super do it. I was worried that the canvas was too tall and that was causing issues, so I tried putting a title or something up there. That obviously looks terrible and also didn't help. Although I do think the curves at the top were definitely unhelpful. Symbolically, it looked weird because at one point we had this guy, Niall, over here, and he was taller than Miquella, and so that, like, broke the sense of where the dominant figure was. That didn't work. We ended up with more of our character showing, which is harder to be in the place of a wandering noble magic user as opposed to just, yourself. Miquella looked kind of removed. There were a lot of things that just weren't quite doing it. But the biggest one, all of that I could be like, yeah, we'll do some color and we'll make it work. But the biggest one that finally killed it for me was when I was looking at all these grayscales. There's no way to make it where we can actually see Miquella and also have Miquella stand out from the background. Because we can put Miquella into hyper shadow like this, which, by the way, even with a lot of focus, you still barely even notice the Eclipse Shotel, which is a shame because I want it to be, it's a prominent part of this whole thing. Helps set into date and time and all that. But also, if we wouldn't be able to see any features. There would be no face drawing. Everything would be in shadow except a couple of very faint highlights. And while that's a fun style, especially with fabric, it's not really what we were going for with this one. And it means that the focus ends up in weird places, like if we have the eclipse sun or even a normal sun. Versus every other option where we can see Miquella. Miquella, like this one, was a desperate attempt. But the background ends up looking super dark and still kind of dominant. Because there's still dark and light contrast, and the stuff actually around Miquella doesn't contrast as much. And some of the other ones, basically every single time Miquella blurred into the background. And that isn't exactly what I was going for. Look at the lines in this one. This was the closest to where we left off yesterday. Not the line work, but the actual shadows. And you can see that there's kind of a line of action, but it's not a whole lot of one. It's definitely more dominated by these enclosing shapes, like the really dark edges. There's a lot of background details that would further muddy things. Miquella is not that well separated from us. And of course the Shotel still blurs in that pose and doesn't read well. So I finally decided, you can see me trying to sort out a line of action. I also kind of wanted symbolically the shadow from the Shotel or at least from Miquella to fall on the character here. And that didn't work with this angle, and any angle where the sun was actually behind Miquella just completely washed out Miquella, because Miquella's hair is also light no matter what we do. It's kind of a dominant feature of the character. So, with all of those things in mind, don't get me wrong, we did a lot. We got a lot of important stuff figured out yesterday. The general setting is the same. Nile as an accent is going to be the same. Miquella's pose, I think, will be very similar. But I think there's just a little bit more that we need to sort out here. And I'm not from scratching it. Don't worry. Not that one. Not that one, because it went through a lot of iterations and ended up very far off. I guess this one. I'm going to put away Nile. I'm going to put away the background, because a lot of the business, even this already reads much better. Because you don't have those weird dominant straight lines or the diagonal pointing away from the main figure. Like this, it's suddenly much clearer what's actually happening. So we're going to go for a much simplified background, although not to say a bland one, I hope. It's going to be a lot simplified, though. Let's see. We'll come back to Nile in a little bit. That was trying a different angle, which is moving in a certain direction, but still not what we need. Basically, I'm tossing everything except for Miquella Art 2, and I'm putting all of these in composition prep. Zoop! Miquella Alt 2 will be fading away so we can get the pose. And I'm just going to, once again, try to mark our rules of thirds. Well, okay, hold on. For one of these had the rules of thirds. It probably just got buried in the background, though, which I kind of don't want. Well, no matter. I'm sure there's a ruler for it, but messing with the rulers in this program is actually a little inconvenient compared to some other things, so I kind of don't want to do it. Oh, that's useful. Dang it. No, it sets it as a guide, and those are... The problem is they're hard to get rid of. Okay. Let's make ourselves... I'm going to move this from composition prep to just iterations. Let's get ourselves a fresh vector layer in here, and we will keep on keeping on with this. Oh, I do just want to throw something in chat real quick. Just to have it there. I like having stuff in the overlay. It's not like any new viewers are going to see it, so it's not like helping comfort people in the stream. Just for me. Let's see. In the meantime, let's save all the changes we've done. I have Windows. I've hit the wrong button. Doing a lot of nonsense. Okay. Okay. I've got this on pencil and paper prepped out, so hopefully will be easy. Got our pencil color. Woo! Signatures are really satisfying when you can slash the line back through it or as an underline. Like, satisfying to do. They don't always look good though. And it's kind of an overdone style now, but still, it's really fun when you're actually drawing it. And I assume anyone who has to actually have an autograph line, you got to keep yourself entertained somehow. Chatting with people can be good, but it's hard to build up new good conversations in like 10 seconds. Okay, well, in any case, let's just eyeball it, shall we? No, I don't even want that going all the way. I want that going to like here. And there's a couple of specific details I want on this, namely, not there. We're zooming way in on this part. We're zooming way in on a lot of this, actually. But specifically this part. Let's see. I'm going to use my own hand as a reference, because we really only need the hand. It'll be easier to self-insert characters into that if it's your own, like if it doesn't look like someone else's hand. Drawing the noble would be hard and distracting. Obviously, I'm not putting a lot of effort into this. Because that thumb is stinking dreadfully wrong angle. Yeesh. Alright, so assuming that you were gripping the edge of something like that. This is a rough, I don't need to overthink this, but the thumb should at least be out like this, and it actually ends up defining this edge as it comes in. This, on the other hand, kind of roughs in, but there's the bump there. And wow, this actually looks stinking garbo. Surprised that took the whole line with it. Is this not erasing to intersect anymore? Whole line. Huh, how on earth did I change that by mistake? Well, in any case, this is just a rough approximation of hand. There's no proportions or anything to it. But the point is, it's just hand. It's not all of the rest, like arm and body and everything. Puts us more in the middle of the action. But also, I don't know, should be more... Man, that's a good thumb shape. It's just way too short. Whatever. We'll deal with it later. But look, hand. Among Us. Anyway. I know it's 2023, but dang it, that meme's never going to leave my head. He's not for a long time. That's the issue. That shouldn't be angled backwards. It should be angled forwards and still just not come out further than the thumb, which is hard because this thumb is too short. But that's considerably less off-putting as a hand, no? Anyway, why am I doing that? This is definitely you're putting in detail at the wrong stinking phase, dude. Hand. Terrible, terrible garbo, but it's there. Now, as far as background's concerned, we are simplifying considerably. As much as I like the window, it's A, not actually accurate to the room, B, since there's not an eclipse to show, it's not that important for the scene, and C, it was really stinking distracting. I actually like this style where they've got where Miquella is like heavily highlighted while the background, well, Moog in this case, is not. I think we'll do something similar with a very dark background on this. It'll be an interesting composition. But with a light, very, very light Miquella hair and like edge lighting for contrast, and then the actual center of Miquella will be a more mid-tone with focus shadow on the eyes and face, but not enough to obscure the face entirely. However, hopefully that will be no howevers there. Just hopefully that will be good. Man, this is such a tall and narrow aspect ratio. I did not account for how tricky it would be to try to figure stuff out when it's like this. It's hard. It's very hard to keep on my screen. I guess I might be able to rotate these screens, but I'm not sure that I could do it without breaking things, and it would definitely screw up my pen mapping and all that. So it's not worth the effort right now, but it's technically maybe an option in the future. Maybe we could probably make the hand smaller, but that's okay. Because I still like Miquella off into the side a little bit. Okay, lasso tool. Actually, don't have to lasso it. It's on its own layer. Woohoo! Oh dear. Zone still somehow very laggy layer. Oh no. It's not that. It is this. It's just why? Okay. It must be something with this pencil I made that causes lag problems. Let's see. Because the other problem is I want to scale this up, but if it's causing that kind of lag, that's going to be an issue. We're just going to have to... Okay. And it's okay. If it needs time to think, it needs time to think. That might have been too scaled up, actually. Just a little less. It may have been reasonably scaled up. I'm going to rule of thirds this a little bit, but we want it to look like Miquella is close. Let's actually, yeah, let's scale that up more. Miquella should be the bulk of this frame. Move this down a little bit. Okay, we're doing much better on the lag now. Like, it's still there, but it's either I'm finally synced up with the speed that it moves at, or we're actually doing better. Now, the other thing is that I have 2 pose options, and only 2 pose options. We will not be testing any others, because I have to call this at some point. We're going to call this one POV. We may shrink hand a little bit later, that's fine. Pose A. We can put the lasso away for now. Pose A, we're going to stick with simple lines, but I'm not going to mini line over it or anything. We're going to stick with this shoulder dominant pose. Just making sure that I'm on the right layer. I like the strong, bold arm, but I also like it turning in a little bit, just to help contain that side. Then, whoops, pose A, we'll get to experiment with foreshortening, which is always fun. Pose A, let's us put this a little bit more over. And it would also allow us to put the head slightly more down tilted and thus more engaged with us. Or at least with the viewer, although still not looking directly at us because that's not actually a very exciting view, and it's also super not what I want. Although, we definitely need to zoom the hand out a little bit because it looks like and adjust the table angle because it does look like Miquella is looking past us. So perhaps we could lessen the tilt somewhat. Oh, dearie me. All those other lines in there causing intersections and problems. Maybe that's how I ended up on whole line mode. That is super not right. the idea of Miquella looking up is certainly like what would Miquella be looking at? I do kind of like the shadows that would come from Miquella looking down a little bit. It's just we got to zoom out a hair. Or if looking up, it would have to be more of a center view, so it's looking this way, which I still don't want. So I said 2 poses, I meant 2 poses. Let's stick with the 2 poses that I had planned out. Which didn't, for the record, finalize face direction, but generally implied something like this. So yeah, we'll have to adjust POV to match. We'll deal with hair and such as it comes up. This does at least let us get some more interesting Chotel details. We'll have to adjust the grip on it a little bit, which is fine. Because our main light source with this view is going to be coming from this way, and not on screen, so I don't have to be as beholden to it. More specifically, going to be coming from that way. I like my 3D arrows. So it's going to be coming from behind and above right Miquella. Above left from Miquella's perspective, of course. And that should get us some really great highlights on the main action points of this scene. Regardless of the 2 poses we consider, it will have highlights in the right place. On Knuckles and the hand here, on the back of the hair, which is what we really want to glow, on the Chotel, and on one other thing that we haven't got in here yet, but probably won't be that big of a surprise if you've been paying attention. Or even if you haven't. Honestly, it's not like a birthday party. There's not a grand surprise here. So that's pose A. Let's throw in pose B real quick. Just because they both have good lines of action and they're both fairly dynamic. We put pose A away. We go for an even more exaggerated angle here. Let's see. Apparently my folks are out shopping. I don't think there's anything we need in particular. Okay, let me... Dramatic pose, like right in our face. Looming. And this one would make good use of this vertical space. Have the Chotel up in the air. It does encounter the exact same head angle problem, though, that I'm going to adjust the table angle a little bit to try to resolve. So. Gotta remember, big face. But with this one, you'd also would definitely expect to be at more of an under view for it. So it's definitely a more dynamic pose than our last one. Heck, even if we go with the last pose, I feel like we still ought to get this kind of close up on it and this kind of underneath. It's just way more exciting. But the last piece in here, before we choose between pose A or pose B, they're in similar spots, so it should be fine either way, is of course Nile. You can't have Castle Sol without the unkillable guardian, guard captain even. Well, he's both. Certainly not a guardian of us. My word. I mean, if we were ranking bosses by number of times I died to them relative to Malenia, Nile is 1/3 of a Malenia. Which is more than most bosses. and was a lot. It was a lot. Nile was very difficult. Doobie-doobie-doo. But I don't want Nile to be dominant. I barely want Nile in the scene. So this is where we're going to take advantage of that super, super dark background. And we're going to see if I ever actually... Nope. Okay, let me... So I did not get any screenshots of Nile. Shocker. Something about 3 people charging at you at once forces you to have bigger priorities. Nile Elden Ring. Oh, there's cheese, according to the internet. Well, that's to be expected, truthfully. Don't do either of those things. I wish there was a just copy and rename it to 1. Like, stinking... Why does everything have to be copy and replace? Or just don't do? I'm renaming this one too, because it's some generic name. Keyboard spam is always a fun time. Okay, because it doesn't matter. We're not keeping this. But I'm going to throw it in here as a reference, just so we've got some Nile. I need to get the memes off my desktop again. Oh, apparently there's a boss guide. I didn't even notice that text. Okay, this is... I can't vouch for this. The Josh feed. Credit to their YouTube channel for this screenshot of Nile, I guess. In any case, cool, you got a picture of him. That's actually hard to do. Don't get a lot of good views of him in-game or out of it. But the thing about this that matters, specifically, is just a little bitty edge of Nile's armor. So I'm actually going to use this one, even though we're going to be seeing the other arm, because we've got a much better view of this one. And I just want the reflected glints. Let's see. So, got this. Be a reflected glint like that. We've got a couple coming down here. Actually, those would go the other way, wouldn't they? Ah. You know what? I'm just going to cheat. Invert image button. Let's go. Anyway, I still want our main figure here to be the bulk. Miquella should be the primary of what's happening here. And so we're going to try to not... Obviously, we're keeping him mostly in the background, but we also don't want him looming considerably taller. It's okay if we get a little bit, so long as all the details are aimed back at Miquella. So we can get some of this, like, wispiness. We can get edges of that. We get a glint, and we've got kind of the metallic-y part here. And then another glint, and so on. And then finally just like a little bit of the glove. Like, there's not going to be much here. We'll do a little more to make it recognizably Nile, obviously, once we're in that stage, but I'm just trying to get, like, very, very faint. And even then, I feel like we've gone and made this too high. I'm going to scooch it down. After all, we're on a dais of sorts, so if Nile is in the background against a wall, well, then Nile's going to be comparatively shorter. It also means that we get the benefit of this feathery bit we can play with, so we can make it point to the face wherever. But we can also emphasize this like little arm bit to point to the face as well. And then that will point to us. We don't have too many... I'm trying to make sure as many lines lead back towards Miquella as possible, and we'll be doing that with the background as well. What little background there is, which is mostly going to be very faint reflections on bricks. Because it is a flat wall, after all. We might play around with having the banner in there, but it's doubtful, truthfully. Of course, we can also cloak it up, but I think that might be too much. If we had the banner, it would have to be something that's, like, aimed specifically at Miquella, and it would probably look a little forced. Yeah, that looks like the blade out of Transistor more than the Castle Saul banner. In any case, if we do, we'll deal with it, but for the most part, I actually just want dominant Miquella figure. So now, let's think about our two poses. That's also going to affect our Nile placement and our hand placement. We got pose A, which for the record looks like it's looking, I'm going to do this on its own scratch layer. Never hurts to have a scratch layer. POV angle is this way. Gotta love the 3D. That's for pose A. Technically, these don't need to be separate. So pose B currently is, I mean, looming that way, of course, but if they were looking down on us, potentially scornfully or focusedly, it still puts the focus much more in our direction. Not quite nailing that arrow, but that's okay. And even assuming we can't see eyes, where does this ultimately look like it's going? Directly down from the nose, which would still be, oh, jeepers, more centered, but more this way. The point is, this pose is just better, isn't it? I mean, it's got a clear line of action towards what's going to happen between these three, although it's a fairly straight line of action if I'm being honest. Could really emphasize the elbow more if we wanted, but I kind of don't think we do, because that points the eye more out of the way and away from Miquella. We really want this to be actually aimed at Miquella. Looking back at pose A. This has a much neater curve line of action, assuming that we're over there, which we're not. So that's not great. I guess one option, hold on, let's put away our scratch layer, because pose B has the best dynamic rising above us pose. However, obviously I'm still partial to pose A, or I wouldn't even be considering it at this point. So let's do a little scratch layer over pose A. Let's suppose A. Terrible pun, I apologize. Let's do an arm direction swap. So instead of having this one be the one up and raising this shotelle, we're going to move everything to the other side. Which means that this is going to be more like this. And I'll put the shotelle there. And it's still kind of messy, even though the shotelle does frame Miquella's head well. It's not exactly ideal either. That said, it does look a lot more like Miquella's actually going to strike at us, because we're in the angle of the shotelle now. Still need to adjust the POV a little bit, and then I promise we'll try to get to drawing. So, there it is, pose A, pose B. I don't suppose pose B would look good with that other dynamic arm. Probably not. It just puts... There's other options with pose A. We'll tweak pose A a little more, but it'll still be pose A, don't worry. But let's mess with our POV positioning first. I want the scratch layer with the nightmare arrows. Because in any case, our angle looks... Even if we're way down, like, flat with that table altar that we're on, I don't think that edge looks right, truthfully. Because let's think about it. If you are laying on let's just say like a flat surface with an edge, so like the ground on a carpet or some such, and you're parallel to the edge of the carpet, even if you're looking up, like, how steep a line is that actual edge to our eyes? It's not that steep. I think we need to flatten it a little bit. It's still fairly steep. I think it'll be more steep than you think, but I've leaned into it a little too much, I think, in this case. Unfortunately, flattening it like this actually makes it look like we're more out of the way of both poses. I mean, that could look like they're still approaching. But that actually looks more distant, because it's got a more extreme perspective. Okay. You know what? Let's go back to the harsh angle. Let's just make the hand smaller. After all, we don't want our guy to actually look like they're in any position of influence or ability to resist or fight back. We're supposed to be feeling small in this situation. And if the hand's too big compared to Miquella, it makes it look like Miquella's further away. So that's the real reason. We don't want that. Like, yes, good symbolism, yeah, but we can angle the arm right, it'll actually point towards Miquella too, which would be good, but this is definitely not it, champ. Okay. Assuming we're gripping like that. Okay. I should stop nitpicking the hand. It's not like it matters at this point. But it would be nice to get the wrist not looking stupid, you know? Okay, we can leave the upper bit with the thumb, even though the thumb should go much further out, technically. Like, meh. Meh. But the wrist... Oh, maybe that's the issue. Okay. Knuckles out. Pointer finger more out than the others. And then once that lands in, yeah, it does angle back. But the arm itself... That'll angle back, and then the arm itself will actually go that way along the edge. The inside, let's see, should be a smooth arc from here to here, although not quite that large. Smooth arc, and then smooth arc. And what do you know? A hand with too small of a thumb, because we already established that was an issue. That's too big. Cool, there we go. Hey look, it's an arm that actually looks like a heckin' arm a little bit. Got stuck in eraser mode again, my bad. Although we haven't been doing that nearly as much these days. Getting the hang of the tools. Anyway, hand. Very alternatingly sharp and angular hand. Zoomed out. Jose actually looks fairly intimidating now. Like, we're not as distant from Miquella. Pose B looks very intimidating now. Almost out of placeedly so. Which, dagnabbit. Funny how these things go. I still think this is probably the more dynamic pose. I'm just trying to think of what placement of the sickle would be, or shotel, as the game insists on calling it. Because I don't know that it's a proper shotel, so to speak. I don't know, I'm not saying it's a proper sickle either. I just don't know enough about that type of weapon, but it doesn't look like any other shotels I've seen. when attempting to research for this project, so admittedly I don't have the strongest base. Wouldn't be the first time they mislabeled stuff though, so I'm skeptical, but it may well be right. So other options for not on the POV layer, other options for pose B layer would be something more like this, but that kind of puts it in that same problematic behind the head spot. However, it is a more dynamic angle. And other option for pose A, I like that. My challenge with pose A is I like that it looks like they're considering the strike. Looking down and aiming. I think that's good. I don't even want to know what layer that's on, do I? It ain't this one. Oh, it's POV. Okay, that's an easy fix, actually. Oop. Okay, pose A. Two options. Further raised. Okay, not that last one. Oops, don't want to lose the hair either. Let's see, and if we do that, then the tilt really ought to be adjusted accordingly. That more swing back on the handle too, truthfully. That, which would be okay. That's more dynamic. I like what it's going on with this one. I gotta stop just scribbling the handle though. Causing problems. This is the first of any of the compositions we've looked at where I'm like, the canvas is too short. But there is one way to solve part of this. Bring down Miquella. Although this way Miquella does still truly look less important than the Shotel, which would become the focal point. We don't want that. We don't want Miquella too high up. Really do want Miquella to be the focal point. Decisions. I mean, it was like that. Even if it was behind the hair, it ends up looking like he's wiping the sweat off his brow, and not sweating the wipe off his brow. What would that even mean? Did he have like a baby wipe on his brow? And then he sweat so much it fell off? I don't know. This is not a useful train of thought to follow. Problem with the Shotel is it's kind of a hard weapon for me to work with on composition. It doesn't easily point in one direction or another. I mean, it does to an extent, but it takes up so much space on its own. Presumably some of this arm would actually be obscured by hair. Alright, looking back at pose A one more time, because I think this is about as good as pose B is going to get. I think that's dynamic, I think it's exciting, I think it's a good face pose, I think it's intimidating, puts Miquella in roughly the right position towering over us, it's good. Only thing I might consider is if we move it to the center, is that going to make it better or worse in terms of Miquella dominating the scene? Still pretty decent. I'm gonna tweak it over just a hair. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna leave it like that. That is gonna be our final pose B. No more edits, I think. Clearly, I should stop trying to commit to that because it doesn't go well when I do. Let us try pose A again, but with some of that dynamism of pose B. It's still pose A. Not a third pose. I just want to trace the shoulders on this one, and then put it with a more pose A-like pose. Maybe we could even exaggerate this pose further if we wanted, but I think after a point it's going to become comical. There we go. We'll figure out tunic fabric at a later time. Okay, so there's our dynamic pose from pose B. Let's get our contemplative side from pose A, although again, I think I'm going back to the other arm. I like this one sort of locking us in here. Then we've got, oops. We really have this up here, which means we ought to move this up, which means we ought to move, or rather angle this. Okay. Catch with this is I'd like it to be on screen. Put away pose, oops, let's get the pose A face. But more dramatic, so higher up. Less down looking. Maybe even have it tilt this way a little bit, which would be handled with that line. Not the biggest deal. You can put away pose A now. Where do I need to put Miquella to make this dynamic pose work with the Shotel visible there? And actually, hold on. Base idea that might make pose A good. Looking sort of down and past us, almost at the Shotel itself. Like looking at the hand that's holding it. Does that look reasonable as a pose? The face is too turned, I think. Would need to be lower and closer if we wanted that to work. Maybe even obscuring the chest a little bit. Which doesn't work as well with this exaggerated pose. Other thing, just checking my notes, was I had this much more curved out like that. Does that do anything? One more option with this one that might still work with the face. Not if I'm stuck in eraser mode. Looking up at it. Of course, that's going to highlight the face more than I necessarily want to. But hair can help with that shadow. Okay. So these are sort of our three options. Not all at once, mind. We've got pose A. which we could lean into the angle of the show tell a little bit more if we wanted to. But generally speaking, it's pose A. Contemplating the move stoically. Good angle for the lighting, less dramatic overall composition. We've got pose B, just as a reminder, which is very dramatic in action, moments before a strike. And face looking up and away from us almost scornfully, which would be interesting if it fit the lore at all, which I don't think it does. And then there is pose A alternate, which for the life of me, my brain just will not recognize the actual like pose on this one. Maybe I need to get the hair out of the way in order to see it. Or maybe the issue is that the hair was no longer matching. Or the issue is that the face is looking too far to the back. If I were to be in that sort of a pose. Hold on, let me. Sure. This is why mirrors are worth investing in. You'd almost end up with the arm like more in front of the face, which we don't necessarily want. If we wanted a down slashing motion. This one has a lot of potential. It's just we're going to have to keep tweaking with it, and it really might be a case of fiddling with it too much makes it bad. Or at least makes it never stinking happen. But at the very least... I got it. So I keep getting notifications for stuff that is not helpful. Okay. Also getting notifications from the parents, which is always helpful, and I'm glad to hear from them. The spam callers, not so much. Stinking. I've got one fraudulent business after me right now that's like, jeepers. My number has ended up on their just call frantically list, and it's one of those ones where if you pick up, then they accuse you of being in debt to something and like demand that you pay immediately, which is several red flags. The more urgent the call is, for anything involving money, frequently the less legitimate it is. They want you to panic so that you make a bad decision and don't consider your actions. Don't do it. Let's see. The main problem with this one is it almost takes us out of the composition. Jose, we're definitely in it. And this one, we're definitely in it. Cold and calculated is cool, but it's also stiff. It's not what we want. Again, remembering the hair is going to be something more like that, if we're honest. The hilt's got a bad tangent with the hair. I gotta clean this mess up to at least figure out. I mean, honestly, at this point, yeah, let's just toss pretty much everything here. Yeah, that's fine. I'm getting rid of that too. It's going to be tilted to a greater degree than the arm. If the arm is here, then the handle's going to be more like this. Which is certainly an option. Flip side, we could have it be behind, but I don't think that's going to be good. No, that's weird obscuring. Or in front, but that positioning doesn't make a lot of sense. And would also be bad obscuring. Options beyond that. Let's see. Fiddling with pose a little more. I know we're about halfway through the stream today, and I am not spending this entire stream on composition again. Dag nabbit. No. No. Not doing it. Absolutely not. You know what? This is a good pose for another project. But the shoulders don't match the arm. Just full up, that's probably the biggest issue with it. If we go on to pose A again, we have a faint pose A to work off of. Actually, I'm going to remove the actual body pose on this one real quick and see if we can, whoops, like the hair. Let's see if we can't make this one make sense. Goodbye incorrect reference points. Now if we have pose A in here, a slightly more muted pose. Still dramatic, mind, but less intense. Let me put pose A away. Nah, it still doesn't work. That shoulder would need to be raised more, because if that's the one you're leading with, that's kind of the disconnect here, is the body doesn't match this angle. Much too wide of shoulders. And the twist is not great. I have not mastered the draw a bag of flour trick of doing poses. An intriguing pose, not for this project, however. I like the face. Pose A. Fairly... Dang it. Let me do pose A as it is in my paper notes, and if it still doesn't look good in that situation, then we're going to give up on pose A, and we're going to jump for pose B. Because it would be fitting, given the circumstances. And very dramatic. It's going to be hard to beat in terms of the high drama of that pose. We've got this, however, got a little more facing us. We've got the one arm that's out. And the big secret here, beyond the hair, of course. Well, the focus is on us, theoretically. And if that's the case, Miquella should still have to be looking down at us. So once again, we have some slight issues with the distance angle appearance-y thing here. Unless, of course, we've got this really long hair drooping over the eyes. Doesn't work with the hair angle. But what we had in that one was this arm coming around and almost vertical here. Almost like cradling it, but not. I've got to not scribble the handle. I don't know why I keep scribbling the handle. And it was from about here above the head. It was considerably larger than the head. we had the arc of the Chotel. And I actually kind of like that as a pose if, and this is the big if we can fit it in without Miquella becoming outside of the focal point. Because I want the Chotel visible. Of course, it fits in my draft because this particular canvas is still more narrow compared to height than the old one. Okay. We do this. Keeps it in frame. Still has the dramatic pose. The shoulder's still a little wrong. We'd have to level it out slightly. And it's always going to be less dramatic than the other pose, but that is also sort of the point. Okay, now we just need to think about the angle. I've gone and made the hand too big again, haven't I? We did tweaks to the hand. And it looks at least more like Miquella's coming after us. It'd be plausible to have the shadow landing on the arm, which would be fitting. Pose B probably wouldn't be... Well, actually, you might be able to get arm shadow from the hook of that. Also very good, also very dramatic. And much better with the new arm size. Because our arm really shouldn't look noticeably bigger than Miquella's. They're not considerably further away. Suppose the other way to do that is if the arm isn't on the edge of the table. Pose A again is good, but not what we're doing here. This one, also like it, but not what we're doing here. Nile isn't important for this actual composition. Let's bring it back down to the basics. Scratch layer A is no longer relevant. Let's get scratch B. Changing the meaning on that. Happy with that. Okay. So for this one, we've got clear line of action points. We'll have the highlights on here that will be bold. We'll have the hair highlights, which will be bold and lead us into this. And then we can get a little bit of face accents on cheek, on nose, a little bit on edge here. This will still point us towards the face. And it'll come down to the hand. I mean, the hand isn't really the target. We want to imply the target is further down. What if we just toss the POV? We'd want to change it so Miquella's looking more directly at us, but we kind of need to do that anyway, but once again, don't want head-on angle. Head-on angle bad. Very hard. We'll look at pose A instead of pose B. I mean, yeah, this definitely, especially when we take out the POV and we're just trying to make it look like the viewer is in danger, this doesn't look like Miquella's focused on the viewer at all. Remember our eye level here. Is it a silly face? Yes. Does it at least give us a direction? Also yes. Doesn't work for here, though. Pose B is just the better pose. To my chagrin. That said, might be able to do a little bit of this. Have to grab the whole layer. Nah, this looks like our head is like sliding downwards. Too much angle. I suppose that's always going to have been an inherent challenge with the POV approach to this, is, well, truthfully, if you want the character to not look at you and you want to be at a POV, it's going to make it look like the character's not paying attention to you, or their main target, which is bad. Okay. What if pose A but bigger? And move the layer. Why not move the darn layer? Actually scale it, but you know. Too big, methinks. Hold on, I accidentally grabbed both layers. No wonder stuff seemed like the proportions were getting off. That definitely does solve the focus on the protagonist. Or, well, I'm not sure we're the protagonist, truthfully. The problem is that this is such a narrow canvas. Even pose B doesn't really fit on it well. This is such a grim Miquella depiction. I'm gonna have to go do like a cutesy comic afterwards or something. Nile in there on the side. Moving Nile down a bit. Actually, Nile gives us a kind of decent frame of reference. For context between us and Miquella versus us and Nile, we've got some size difference that works in our favor. Because if Nile looks considerably smaller, then we realize that, oh, Miquella is actually close. Although not too much smaller, I suppose. This is more just a tangent issue. The shoulder lined up weird. Okay. So we don't really have any other context for the room. Suppose we could theoretically get some, but even that's going to be behind the hair. Just have to deal with what little texture we have on the background to help give some context there. And Nile. But I'm actually, you know, obviously I think it's been pretty obvious from the start I'm biased towards A, and I just wasn't getting it where I wanted to. I think this is good. I'm liking pose A. Well, remember pose B. Pose B is good. Oh, jeepers. This has been a heckin' mess. But I think we're here. It's funny, all that to get down to 3. Whew. Well, that's been a marathon. So I'm going to take a quick little, like, 5-ish minute break, use the restroom, drink some water, and then I guess we'll start on a slightly more detailed layer. Crazy to think about. Or we'll do one last composition confirmation thing with some colors just to make sure that everything lines up well, but I'm fairly confident it will. And then we'll get some sketching done today, so help me. This has been getting ridiculous. We have to. But yeah, in just a couple minutes, we'll come back and we'll do that. So I hope to see y'all on the flip side. Howdys and salutations, y'all! Thanks for your patience. Okay, where we left off, I swore that we would actually do some drawing today, and we will, because we've been doing composition for a whole stinking week, and the amount of iterations we've gone through is frankly horrible. So many stinking versions. Versions. Ah! Too much. Too many things. And I guess we could just average them all out and see what comes out of it, but I suspect the result would be a horrible, horrible mush. Although, weirdly, a horrible mush with a strong line of action. Not really. Stinking mess. Okay, so putting all that away, and sticking to what we actually want in here, we finally figured out the alignment of our characters and the layout of this scene. And if it looks a little too cramped, so heckin' be it. I'm done. But I may tweak it a little bit still. I've been tweaking this to death. I've got to stop. We want this character to look close and imposing, so they need to be like this then. That's just the way of it. Oh, jeepers. What is... No, we're putting... Go back. Okay. Leaving it alone. We're not breaking it again. Good enough is good enough, and we'll have plenty of interesting details to work with in this composition, even if it's a little tight. Next time, I'm planning out my canvas size better. That's the lesson I've learned from this. Because this hyper narrow and tall is stinking tough to work with. Okay. Getting away from our Nile reference and back to Miquella. An interesting figure in and of themselves. Whatever. Let's just do one very, very quick. We're going to get our Windows XP screensaver pen, which is a custom pen I made and is ridiculous. Not a good pen. I just made a custom layer in the folder for no reason. Anyway. And let's just make sure that when we shade everything super roughly, it looks not terrible. Because we may have to do some Nile tweaks, truthfully. I'm going to need a bigger... I'm rougher than that. There we go. Just roughly where everything belongs. Name on this side, that's fine. I don't like the seam that this pen leaves, but there's very little I can do about it with this particular layout. We're going to stick to fairly light hand and only marginally darker table. Not anything crazy. We do want fairly dark face, specifically up here. More up here, truthfully. Because we want the hair to be super light. The hair should be almost distractingly light. Oops, not as dark as the background. With that, we're going to reiterate that background darkness a couple times, probably. Got Miquella's outfit as fairly dark, though, still. Darker than the hand, darker than the table. Light hair to contrast. Overall, ominously dark expression and face. And I'm actually going to use a full-on darker gray for the background. Including Nile, because Nile's only going to be some highlights and is still going to be pretty dang dark. Okay. Overall, if we look at this as a little thumbnail, it's still clear what's happening. Almost. There's one piece that I need to accentuate, and then it will be. Namely, I want a little bit more highlight. We'll really amp up the highlight. It's going to be smaller. We're still doing 15, though. We don't need crazy detail. We want the hair highlight. We want high contrast against that edge. We'll have a little hair highlight. We'll have a little hand highlight where the light's hitting it. And really importantly, we're going to make sure that this is catching the light, so that it's clear the sheen on the blade is showing up well. Not the sheen from Jimmy Neutron. If we put that sheen on the blade, I think it would muddle the image somewhat. Okay, but even from a distance, that's got a clear motion. It's got a clear figure imposed. Like this is readable, even pretty tiny. Like I can't tell what's happening, but I can tell where the characters are, which is what we were not getting from. Well, certainly not when it's a hodgepodge like this. There's no way that averages out into anything usable whatsoever. But even the individual ones really didn't. Honestly, the biggest thing is when we zoom out on this one, even when it's small, the thing that I'm paying attention to is the actual characters. Like, even when it's super tiny, the light part that's drawing the eyes is the characters, which means that when it's bigger, we've got the same deal. That's where our focus is going. With pretty much all of these previous ones, and I mean, like, all but one, and that one I had to really stretch it to make it happen, your eye was drawn straight to the background or the border, which was not good. That means that they were way too dominant. So, we have said enough to all of the composition nonsense. I'm going to call this quick shade. Let's actually hecking draw something, finally. Let's see. It's still going to be rough sketch, but it's going to be a step above where we were. So I'm going to put away our lovely shading here for now. I'm going to make this whole folder less opacity so that it's, everything we've drawn so far is like nice and faint in background. And then let's actually start. We're not getting hyper detail. If y'all remember with the Malenia illustration, this is the part where we're trying to block in a lot more of the important shapes. We've already done it a little bit with what we've got here, but we'll try to get this with a lot more focus. One part of that is that I may actually swap our images here. Here's the weapon we're looking at. Now that's a stinking pixelated version of the weapon. Elden Ring certainly likes its grandiose stuff. This would actually be stinking terrible to use, I'm pretty sure. But, I mean, in the game it's probably fine. Oh, I need the actual layer to draw on, don't I? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to call it Rough Shotel, because that's apparently what this is. I don't have enough weapon knowledge to argue with them on that. And we can... Again, I'm not trying to get everything, but I want to be getting... Whoops, let's also do this in the actual pencil color that we've got. 686868. Nice and easy. Not worried about our color palette up here at all. We're going to try to get actual curves and lines. We're going to go fairly faint on this one. This is going to be considerably more detailed. And this is also now where I actually stinking care how the curves look. So you're going to see me doing a lot of this retry thing, which is fine, because I want this to be fairly faint. Well, actually, that's still not right. Okay, two things I'm going to do on this one. For this rough layer, let us be sneaky and use the circle tool. This is going to be a filled circle, isn't it? Nope. Okay, cool. And okay, I've got it set to center point right now. That's probably good. We can line that up with where the handle should be. We can get ourselves a proper circle in here. Just as a reference. Now, two things. One, the handle is actually longer than I've accounted for with this sketch. So that would push the circle up, and thus also potentially mean that we ought to shrink it down a little bit. I'm going to hold down Shift so that it stays a circle instead of getting all oblong-y. Let's see if too much of it is out of frame like this, because there's a very high chance that's the case. But I do like, and it really, oh jeepers. Yeah, we're going to have to adjust angle on this. This is the fun part where we have to sort of face actual reality a little bit. Or tweak reality if it doesn't match well with what we're trying to achieve. So we've got that. It's a really stinking fine line. Got that, knowing that after a point it actually stops getting bigger. Cool. We'd have like a little little bit of our fire pattern there. Keeping this the same width as the widest part of that upper section. We're going to do this. There we go. Okay. Grip is really down here. Doesn't necessarily mean Miquella's holding it right. Might be choked up on it. If we're trying to look for a more professional thing, then probably not. And if we clear out this line, does it look terrible? Yeah, that's basically off screen, ain't it? So now is where we get to tweak reality a little bit. And also work on the stinking hilt, because wow, that's garbo. Because of the angle on this, for the record. Okay, anyway. We can always adjust Miquella's grip. I mean, there's nothing to say that you couldn't hold it more forward. Which would put our sort of central axis, instead of being basically off the page like it is now, we might be able to tweak our central axis to be more up like this, with minimal problem in terms of hand positioning. We're going to change it a little bit though. Because that's not really a natural swing angle. Granted, nothing about this is a natural swing angle. Actually, thinking about this, if you have an angle like that, you really ought to be tilting the thing towards yourself anyway. So that might work in our favor. Something more like that. Because it's sort of over front, so that would be tilted towards the head. Yeah, okay. Which means we could basically have that at any angle we want, and it would look reasonable. So, okay, cool. We'll deal with more of that in the actual arm phase, but while we're working on the shotel, let's at least go for a more useful axis. I'm just trying to think through, make sure I've got the understanding right in my head. Right, so if we have it like this, then that's going to be parallel to that slant down angle. Okay, so that's going to be, if it was like this, you've got the actual like fist around it, which would have thumb facing you, so it's going to be more visible back here actually. Man, for whatever reason, this is really hard to get right in my head. I'm like trying to figure out exactly what this needs to be like. Okay, I think so. It's more that, once again, arm up. Let's start this from the arm rather than from the shotel, because that is where the actual, thing would be starting. The shotel doesn't determine where the arm is, it's the other way around. Let's see. More of a slight, and then that. Thumb there. And then that would put the weapon angled like this, which would be very dramatic and probably unwise. Okay. We'll deal with that once we get to the actual arm, but it means we have a certain amount of leeway in terms of the angle that we actually want to put this at. And specifically, we've got leeway, and then now we've got a wrist that's drawn and held the right way. I can literally just rotate it and see how it'll look at different angles. A mostly vertical angle is going to look a little bit off. We can work like this and see where that puts us. That becomes our center line. Then we can toss some of these old stray ones, including that. And remember our center line. We can use our circle tool on that center line at roughly the right distance. And boom, that puts us... Actually, I'll have to be careful with that, but that actually puts us very nicely in line with some things. That said, I do want to make it a little bigger. Okay. So now we've got roughly all that in place. We're going to go back to our pencil. And we're going to do a less, sketchy and terrible version of this. I hope. Let's better angle on that, shall we? Sharper line. Yep. And this is where I'm going to try to actually pay some amount of attention to line quality as well. Not a ton, but a little bit, because it'll be useful later. For example, none of that nonsense. Maybe a smaller eraser would be helpful now that we're getting up in here in the nitty-gritty details. We'll have a much better grip when we do the actual hand. But again, right now, this is still... It's not composition rough, but it is still rough. So, let's see. I think we do want this on the outside edge, actually. It's going to be easier to deal with the other thing, and it'll make it a little bigger, which is nice. As the point comes out just a little bit past. And then it stays basically equidistant, so I'm going to have some fun trying to do that correctly. But, yep, let's get rid of all this spare section of this circle. Thank you, Circle Tool, for your help with alignment. We can also get rid of this line. It's no longer necessary for alignment. Zooming out once again, that still looks pretty good in terms of angles and everything. If we need to lean into it a little more, we can bring this point down more. It'll point more directly, but I think that's pretty good right now. We will not have this tiny arm. We'll do proper foreshortening and actually make it not garbo. But once again, that is for the fine detail, sketch/proper inks, not for this level of detail. I want this roughly the same width here. Fortunately, because I want to try to keep this equidistant, I don't think I'm going to be able to do just like in one nice swoosh. And while I could use the circle tool, I don't really want to. We can always do the old geometry constructed from a series of lines, which is bad art practice for the record. Although usually it's bad art practice because people are doing like this, which does get you there, but looks really stinking messy. And in addition to probably causing lag with the vector lines, it ends up looking rather unprofessional at the end of things. That's not to say we can't use it super sketchily to get ourselves to figure out where we need to be hitting. And I may even do an old connect the dots, which is silly, but it will help because as long as I can make sure that each of these dots is the same distance from our main crescent, which even those sketchy marks weren't, by the way. As long as these are consistent, then I'll be able to get a nice arc going in here. For the record, this is basically just a very manual way of doing a Bezier curve. Bezier curve. Look, after I learned that those other things were pronounced Euler and not Euler, I don't trust any pronunciations. Like, Euler, apparently. Never would have guessed. It's amazing how different languages pronounce things. Okay. Before I do that final line, let's clean up all this kind of rubbish. I've chosen kind of a rough place to start with our details. I should have started with like the tunic, or, well, not like the hand would have been an easy one either. This is... I think it'll go faster on this one than with Malenia. At least I sure hope it does. But this is definitely where we spent the second most amount of time on that illustration. Of course, we spent the most amount of time on that one doing the value blocking, and I think that's also going to go faster now that we have some sense of what the heck we're doing, and I've got some process stuff figured out that'll speed it up. So hopefully. Alright, that's actually a thumb, theoretically. This is going to be above us in perspective, so it needs to arc away from us. And then the bottom of this thing is really, really funky. In fact, I'm probably going to have to account the hand for it, even. Because it really tapers out. There's nothing quite as nasty as trying to make a symmetrical taper without actually using like a symmetry ruler. Which I should use a symmetry ruler. Genuinely, the way they do guides annoys me. I tend to steer clear of them unless I have to use them. Which, you know, we may get to that point. Just thinking, this is always a mess. You can tell it's a mess, partly because I've gotten sloppy and started using the edge of my pencil, which is getting us those much wider, messier lines. At least most of this is gripped by the hand and thus not visible. That's a small mercy. I'd rather draw a hand than try to draw this. Honestly. Genuinely honestly. I don't like drawing symmetrical curves. Drawing one curve is easy. Trying to match it, like, against a perfect parallel, thinking awful. Even, like, with these tools. Like, that still doesn't match. And it still looks bad when you try to connect it. It looks childish. Ugh. Annoying. Something I need to practice, I suppose. Anything that's annoying is usually just I guess I need to go and spend some time learning how to do it right. Because there's almost always a better way to do it that is less hassle. Sometimes that better way is just practicing until it's not a hassle, but, you know. Okay. There we go. Not perfect, but I'm able to get nice long sweeping lines that follow these dots much more easily than if I was trying to, figure out how to do this parallel in my head. And are these lines perfect? Not remotely. Especially not that first one I did that was super shaky. But dagnabbit, they're not terrible for freehand lines. Fortunately, now I need to move all this nonsense out of the way. Oops, 1 second. I don't have a mute button. Uh-oh. Well, the sneeze failed anyway, so that's fine. Never mind, it did not. Sneak attack. Let's see. I suppose the other thing I can do on this curve after the fact, once I clean this up, because I've really used a very silly technique here when I have tools to not have to do stuff like this. How many? Let's do a little cleanup of this mess first. It's funny being able to just drag the scribbles out of the way. But the other thing I can do, once I clear out the last of the scribbles... Man, I freehand, like, tip-tap single lines a lot more than I even realized, and I knew I did it a fair bit. Okay. We haven't messed with these in a while, and it's because it's real easy to get way too caught up in details with them, so we shouldn't mess with them until we're doing like final inks and such. However, in this particular case, it does make sense to use the Connect Vector Line tool. Because it will turn all of these, like what lines are separate, it will turn into singular lines for the most part. That one was pretty good as is. There we go. And I can erase this. Oops, that was not erase. And now, if we zoom out, all of, well, okay. Gotta connect here too. Now all of this is one line, which also means that I can simplify it. And that'll basically just mean that there's fewer points along the line. You can see that there's fewer than there were. There's a little bit we're gonna have to clean up because it doesn't like simplifying exactly where the intersections used to be. There's sort of two types of control points, and the intersections leave one kind. That is sometimes harmless, and frequently really stinking annoying. So, that's fine. Fine. There, see, these square ones are the kind that are obnoxious. We can line those up a little better. And again, I'm going to try not to nitpick any of this too crazy. I'm just... Yep, see, you can see that this weirdness is causing a problem. Move that out. And there we go. Just to practice drawing not that good of a curve. Wow. Anytime two of these points are too close together, it tends to lead to sort of the lumps that you see. And if I could have just drawn these points, then we actually probably would have had a smoother line. That's fine. I see this other line. Oop. Okay. Well, that was a silly amount of effort for something that didn't require it, but I wanted to look good at the end of the stream, and we got 9 minutes left. So, next up, we're going to deal with some of these flames. Now, we don't have to do anything crazy on these, and I, in fact, am going to try to stop myself from doing anything stupid with them. But I do want to take a quick look at how they handle them, because these are twistier flames than I usually see. We got stuff like that. This would be an actual amazing bit of metalwork if it were real. I'm probably a decent way around. I'm going to make some points for where these big ones are. This first big one should be about here. Honestly, that's the only one I'm going to really worry about for now, other than because then they just seem to come consistently around the edge, which is interesting. Let's use the edge of the pencil. That looks silly. Like our little side spike. This. Whoops. And I may not follow all of it with this level of accuracy. I'm just trying to get a feel for how they do flames. And then we can get a little more freeform with it. The main thing is that there's these fairly consistently spaced periodic, like large spikes, and then smaller spikes in between. Yes, if you're counting, depending on what you count as big, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-ish. Okay, yeah, it doesn't really line up with a clock or anything. It's Elden Ring, so you know someone could come up with a whole lore story if there were, like, those matching the hours and when, like, the weapon's supposed to be used, and a bunch of other obsessively detailed stuff. And as much fun as that stuff is, it'll also drive you mad. Like, absolutely batty. This weapon also has a considerable risk to the wielder, I'm noting. Definitely ceremonial thing. Because this would be really stupid to use in actual combat. Looking at you, all the players who use it in actual combat, not actually dangerous in the game, so it's fine. Well, I mean, I suppose it's dangerous to anyone you point it at. Trying to make our way around this a little bit. Nope, big one, little alt. Swoosh. Bigger swoosh. Certainly an interesting flame they've got there. I guess, by the way, I should clarify for anyone who doesn't know what this particular weapon is. In the game, it was apparently used for some ceremony, something where they were trying to make someone immortal and it didn't work, or make someone undead and it didn't work. But the concept was based on I believe, solar eclipse, and it's actually a really clever design for a weapon. It looks very cool. It's a stupid thing to actually make, but great for a game. Because it's got the cool, like, they use the outer edge of the weapon for the edge of the sun or whichever light source they're working with in that game, because who stinking knows what universe they live in. But the edge of their star, and you can see it around the edges, whereas the interior is open. I don't know. It's an interesting and creative design. I'm intrigued by it. I don't use it in the game, but I'm intrigued by it. I guess the secret at this point is just kind of periodically have big flames. I should probably point more inward. Then I've got to fight the human desire to make things symmetrical, because believe it or not, even though we're not always good at it, we tend to like trying to make things symmetrical, and then we realize that they look really artificial. Obviously, I'm not just going off of the reference anymore, I'm just kind of winging it, which was working until this particular flame when I tried to talk instead of doing it. I suppose that's on me, really. Let's bring this down a little more before we do the counter spike. This would be one of the toughest Elden Ring things to actually make in real life, and it is one of these so-called legendary armaments, which doesn't actually mean they're good, it just means that they've got important lore stuff, and you get an achievement if you manage to find all, I think, 7 of them? Easier said than done, I might add. Given that they're scattered across the entire stinking world of that game. I did manage to do it, although with a wiki for the last one. There's no way on earth would I have found it. I mean, I found the cave where it lived. I had just made the executive decision to not go back into that cave. Actually, I didn't even know the cave was there. I went near it, and there's a boss in front of the cave, and it was a boss I didn't care to fight, so I was just like, I'm going to leave, thank you. Okay. We've got ourselves a bit of a border here now. Now, obviously, there's only so much that we can actually make out well from this. But it does look like there is sort of a groove in the middle of this, and that occasionally these sort of smooth off the edge as opposed to like growing almost like vines, which kind of works for flames, truthfully. Oh, jeepers, what's happening here? I mean, that actually does kind of work, but... Pardon. Other times it's more... just like kind of flows into the edge a little bit. But there is still always that ridge there, and then there is a central ridge that goes pretty close, but not quite all the way to the actual spike. I'm going to want a considerably smaller pencil even than I've been using to just try to get that one. We'll do that, and that will probably be where we wrap for the night. I cannot tell y'all how excited I am to be properly done with composition, which I know is how I left off the previous stream, and then we had more composition, but I'm committed to this. I don't, like, it actually, like, even if it's not the most dynamic or creative, or I'm sure there are better ones out there, but unlike last time, this at least meets the basic requirements of how to make an image not look terrible with your layout, and so I am happy with this. And we'll probably, no, I'm going to say definitely not be doing any more of that full-on composition rework nonsense that I'd been doing. Because that was terrible. It was terrible. It was a bad time. I'm glad we've gotten through it. Again, that was one of the... I listed out the whole point of every time we do an illustration like this, there's a few, I want to make sure we're specifically practicing a couple of new skills. That's not exactly the recommended way to do it. They typically suggest, like, try to practice new skills separately, and then, like, once you practice them, use them in an illustration. But I have a day job, so I don't have time to do as much practice as I would like. So instead of that, we just try to work in reasonable quantities of practice here. And one of our big ones for this stream was composition, because it's not something I'd ever even, like, fully understood. So I think we've come a long way with it, although I'm not going to pretend I fully understand it still. But there's at least a better understanding than there was. And hopefully y'all have learned a little bit of something too from watching it, or poking your heads in. No shame if you didn't, though. My horrible trial and error for composition was probably not the best way to learn it, but hopefully it at least is a example that, you know, if you don't nail it on the first try, that's a-okay. There. Just going to keep on working my way around with these, and then we'll get the groove. I may. And then we'll probably leave it at that. So we'll go a little over time today, but that's okay. After all, I think we owe a little catch up after the sheer amount of time we spent on composition for this one. We're in embarrassingly large numbers of, like, YouTube episodes in on this before we get into any actual sketching. That's on a different layer. Cool. . Okay. That was probably too much to erase. Even though that line itself is likely too bold, that's okay. Again, we're just in getting these details in here mode, and then we'll do proper inking as the next stage after this. Although actually, I think based on what we learned last time, actually no, definitely still want to ink before, or at least do final sketch layer before we go through and do the values and colors and such, because otherwise if we adjust our sketch, then we have to readjust all the values and colors that were like filled in and are now in the wrong place. Super not the recommended way to do this, but at least we can get it in big strokes instead of scratching it along. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, this is not ideal. Okay, line weight issues aside, and actually, hold on, vector lines, we can change that. Adjust line width. Narrow it by 1. These vector tools are ridiculously handy. I'm going to scooch my way along here. And this I can be scratchy because I don't care what the actual line quality is, but you can see why doing these little scratches ends up looking kind of bad. And there we go, it's a little more faint. We can even make it more faint in this section. There we go. Oops. Section like that. Really bring some of that down, because it's not like our main border edge, nor is it the main like cutting edge of this blade. So it's not that important that that line is there, and I probably ought to try to break it up a little more in some of these sections. Just, you know, add a little texture to it. See, now that we're on the sketching phase, I don't want to end the stream, but I definitely need to. Sleep is tragically a critical thing that humans have to do. Here we can even like incorporate this little like nook into it. That'd sort of be a thing. And last up, this one. Whoops. For the record, I should probably also deal with the line weight of this much darker inner edge too, which also has the issue of being a different tool, and so it's going to be a different quality of line no matter what. Unless I were to, you know, trace over it, which going to end up being fairly sloppy. I guess I can rotate the canvas. This is one of those things that makes, for as long as I can make this like follow the bend of my elbow, it's actually much easier to stay on the line. Oops, that's zoom. Technically, this is probably one that I should be drawing from the shoulder and not the elbow, but like, look, it's hard enough to try to retrain and not draw stinking everything from the wrist, so give me a break. And we're nearly there with this one. Which, to be fair, probably should have been a darker line than these lines that I'm making. But again, we're still in the rough sketch phase. We're just making sure that once we add the details and positioning and everything looks good, and then we can finalize with like line quality and stuff when we're doing the inking. First off, we're resetting to our main angle. And if I pull this out of the way, cool. We have, at the very least to start us off, the detail work of the Chotel. Next time, we will get into some more exciting detail work, because we got a couple of complicated things coming up in this piece. We've got the face, of course, which given that we literally don't have a face ref for this character, except for this extremely low detail statue. This is not that helpful, I'm going to be honest. So that's not helpful. Other fun thing that we're going to have is this hand down here, because it's close enough that we're going to want to get some proper detail on it. And given that it's a specific type of character from the game, I'm going to have to try to find a reference for that specific hand, which will not be great. That said, all in all, I think that this is going to be a decent place to leave this off. I feel like we have finally made tangible progress on this, and hopefully we'll be able to keep that up in the next one. So thank y'all for dropping by, and I hope y'all have a good evening.